you make these commitments to each other equally so, and there are consequences to sex. There are risks to sex. This is why it's not a decision that you can make as an individual in your own relationship, because you can be like, yeah, no, it doesn't matter if I go have sex with 10 other people. Of course it matters if you go have sex with 10 other people. Welcome to Mom Alternative. Today we're going to do a debate by proxy, which means we're going to take contrasting clips from different podcasts talking about the same topic, and then we're going to cut them to see if we can figure out some kind of coherent argument that follows its way through that. Our topic today is going to be pornography and its impact on relationships. We'll be using the Lex Fridman podcast, where he did an interview with Aella, who is a sex worker, and the Jordan Peterson podcast, where he did an interview with Louise Perry, who wrote a book titled The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. Now, my usual format on this channel has been to read through some of the stories and the struggles that women specifically seem to have in their relationships, on their motherhood journeys, when it comes to parenting, in their marriages, and so on. And we haven't yet really touched on the topic of porn for many reasons. In general, it is one of the most common problems that women really struggle with when it comes to their marriage and the health of their marriage in general. So if I had to summarize the top issues that women have that at least come up in this forum a lot, they would be from a marriage perspective. Number one would be a failure to negotiate successfully with their spouse when it comes to things like household chores and looking after the kids and so on. So it's this idea that men help out too little in the home. That would be one aspect to it. And the other two, I think, are very, very closely connected. One is the use of pornography and what type of impact that has on men, on male sexual drive, on their interest in having a healthy, fulfilling sex life with their wives. And the other one would probably be cheating, which is connected, because I think how to delineate between use of porn and cheating is getting more and more complicated these days with things like OnlyFans, where you do have some level of interaction with another woman. All that said, this was very interesting to me from a topic perspective. And then when both of these podcasts came out, they came out in very, very close succession with each other. And I watched them pretty much within a day of each other. They are so wildly different and give you such a completely different perspective and a different impression of how porn impacts men and what type of impact it has on us as a society, that I thought it was kind of mind-boggling, and I wanted to bring these together. So we're going to get started with the first clip from the Lex Fridman podcast. As a reminder, here he's interviewing Aella. We will link the full podcast as well, so you can watch all of it.
It's nice. I like it.
Okay, you like it?
Yes.
What effect do you think it has on society?
Probably reduces rates of rape, because really horny men get an outlet that's not a real life woman.
Okay, so what about like I said, I finished reading Brave New World. Like the over-sexualization, does it increase the sexualization of society that's not, to a degree that's not good? Or is this good? Does it alter in a negative direction our relationship with sex?
It's unclear. It might. I don't know how to evaluate this thing, right? Because this is one of those really charged things where I kind of don't trust anybody's arguments on it because it's too charged. But there's another question, which is is it a net positive or net negative?
Yeah.
It's possible that it might be a net negative for specifically our relationship to sex, but a net positive overall in general. I'm not sure. But my guess is that in general, it's better to let people do the thing that feels good to them, and then the environment will naturally modify to fit this thing. And then if we have more needs in response to that, then we're going to figure out a way to take care of those needs. So if you're watching a bunch of porn and this makes you not want to go have sex with women, then we're going to have to change the way that we experience IRL connection.
To compete with porn?
Yeah. Which seems like a natural evolution of the civilizational cycle. I'm pro natural evolution, and instead of trying to stop things that people want to do naturally, we figure out how to integrate that and find a more healthy outlet.
But you have to then be first honest with the effects that porn has. So is it a negative thing? Is it a positive thing in real life sex interaction? You're going to have that more and more with whether porn in VR or maybe porn, AI porn.
Yeah.
Is that a bad thing? What if porn with AI, or even in physical space, sex robots, what if that's more pleasurable in a bunch of different dimensions than with other humans?
Then we should figure out artificial wombs. I don't know.
How important is sex for society, I guess, between two humans?
I don't know. We're having less sex and making fewer babies, and that seems probably not great.
Yeah, right. With the babies one.
Yeah.
But the babies, there's probably artificial ways to have babies that we can figure out.
Yeah.
Okay. So she made a series of points that if you take them all separately, you can kind of see why there's why I'm pretty sure quite a bunch of people would react so strongly and so negatively to it. And one of the things that I find, and I'm honestly not knocking her as an individual at all. I actually thought she seemed like a pretty nice person, and I related a lot to some of the things that she said from childhood perspective and her experiences there. So I kind of understand how she got here and why she thinks in this particular way to some extent. But the points, all of them put together, are pretty horrendous. The first point that she makes is that she says she thinks that porn most likely has a positive impact on men because it gives people who would otherwise have very strong sexual urges an outlet that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And this might be true to some extent. Honestly, I don't know. But I think that you could still make a very easy argument against it for the vast majority of men. So one of the things that we do know about porn is that it results in a sense of desensitization. And so what that means is that men will often start watching porn, and I say men because I think the majority of people who consume porn in visual form are men. Men will often start watching porn that's maybe, let's call it vanilla, that's quite laid back. You know, there's not too much going on. It's just the sexual intercourse in and of itself. And then what happens is that you get desensitized to that, and eventually you get something that's a little bit more extreme and a little bit more extreme and a little bit more extreme, until at the end of it, the thing that you need to watch in order to just experience arousal and to be able to achieve orgasm is so intense, so violent, so aggressive, that it's not good. It's not good and it's not healthy. So the desensitization is one aspect of it. The other aspect from a rape perspective, I would argue, is that her argument fundamentally assumes that men rape because they need a sexual outlet. This might be true for some proportion of men. I would probably argue that there is a fairly significant proportion of men for whom rape is about the control and the power that they get from it, rather than actually about sex. That's one argument against that I would say. The other one the other way in which porn can be super, super damaging to people is this idea of women as objects of sexual gratification. I think if your primary interaction with women, if you just see them in this way often enough, then you don't really have interactions with women outside of that space. If you're investing a lot of time in watching porn, and that means that your relationship with women is completely messed up, that reduces your ability to have actual fulfilling relationships with women, not even counting the part that comes with the expectations that you have. Like, your image of sex is just so completely different from what women actually enjoy. If you watch porn a lot, you'll see that women do things in porn that they probably don't really, like the majority of women don't really want to do in real life. And that gives you a very skewed perspective when it comes to what you think sex is going to be like, which then creates its own set of conflicts. So that's that point about, hey, porn probably reduces rape, reduces incidences of rape because men have an outlet. The other question she asks is it possible for it to be a net positive despite being negative in some ways? And so, for example, maybe porn is negative for relationships, reducing the number of relationships that people are having, reducing the number of kids that people are having for whatever, or I guess we're also reducing the number of kids that people are having for whatever other reasons, maybe not just porn, but potentially it still is overall positive for us as a society. And I think that comes from this perspective that maybe relationships are not quite as essential for human happiness as they are, as I believe they are anyway. I think for the vast majority of people, being in a long-term committed relationship, having a family, having kids, these are things that are really fundamental and essential for you as a person. And I think Lex Fridman tries a little bit to get at that when he says, what is the role of sex? Like, how important is sex for us to be human? And she says, I don't really mind us being human too much. I can kind of very vaguely understand this idea of not caring too much if we evolve further, and not being so tied to our natural way of life, I guess is one way of saying it. But that fundamentally, as a departure, maybe that works for her. But I think that there's a very strong argument to be made that for the vast majority of people, they're just not going to be happy that way. They're just going to live lonely, miserable lives. and the outcome for them is going to be extremely negative. So that seemed to me like a response from someone who has not really engaged or interacted with, just engaged with the negatives of porn at all. And I think that that's especially a shame because she kind of represents it a little bit. And as a sex worker, as someone who participates in it, then she's also part of the people, I guess, who are responsible for perpetrating it. And I would wish that people like her, who seem super nice and who are very intelligent, who are really interested in research, that they would also have this question of, okay, what is the thing that what's the impact of the thing that I'm doing on the people that I'm interacting with? That's one aspect. The other aspect the third argument that she touches on is this idea of evolution and how we should, as a society, keep up with the technologies that evolve by simply evolving even better. So, for example, if porn stops people from wanting to pursue relationships, then we need to change how we pursue relationships in order to fix it, I guess. And that seems to me in many ways, like I kind of get where she's coming from with that one. I think of all the points that she made, that one is the one that I'm most sympathetic to. But I think the problem with it is it does not it just doesn't take into consideration the fact that we have developed the way that we have developed through millennia, right? Through hundreds of thousands of years. You cannot expect, technology is changing at such a rapid pace that there's no way for our evolutionary system to keep up with it. And so this idea of instant gratification and why instant gratification is so extremely powerful to us is because from a survivalist perspective, it makes perfect sense. If you, for example, find a fruit and then you eat it and you have this instant dopamine hit from that experience. The point is that we did not develop to have that type of dopamine hit on such a regular basis without having to work for it. And so if you come to this conclusion of saying, yeah, but we can just accept that porn is going to be there. If people want to watch porn, we should just let them watch porn. And it doesn't matter what influence or impact it has on them because we can just fix the negatives after the fact. I think that let's say I believe that a lot of people would suffer a lot for us to kind of go about it that way, in the way that they are already suffering, that we already know of. And then the last point that she makes, and that is the point that I found the most, just on a real visceral level, I would say I reacted with disgust, was this idea of artificial wombs. I think that you can only come up with the idea of artificial wombs and argue for that if you have never had any connection to, definitely if you've never been a mother, I'd say as minimum. If you've never actually been pregnant, experienced what it's like to grow a human life, and then birthed it, and then watched it grow, and seen that whole experience and the type of connection between mother and child that is born through that, then I don't know how to describe to what extent, to the extent to which that feels evil and inhuman to me. It comes from this place where I would say you have no appreciation for human life and how it's made and how it's created, and the joy that experience brings, not just to the mother but also to the child. You have no idea, the way that a baby experiences being in the womb, which obviously is something that we don't know a lot about, but we do know that they can hear, we know that they can feel, we know that they drink, so we know that they can taste. We understand that they have all of these senses that are developing while they're inside the womb. We know that they recognize the mother's smell when they're born. We know that they can hear her voice and recognize her voice from a very from when they're still I don't even remember how many months old from a gestational perspective, but these are all things. Babies are not just born in a vacuum, cannot be just born in a vacuum. They have a perception. They understand that they're inside a human being and that human being is their mother. I say understanding. Obviously, it's not a conscious understanding. And I understand that maybe some people will have major problems with this as an argument. But I truly believe that you cannot make this point of let's just get artificial wombs. Who cares if we stop having babies, unless you've never experienced what that is like. And I think in some ways you're degrading the connection between child and family, between child and mother, child and father, child and family, just by throwing that out there as though it is an alternative and it is an acceptable alternative for us when it comes to babies and how they're made. So that's my personal response to these first set of points. But let us hear from Jordan Peterson.
You're going to have a way better sex life in every possible way if you actually fall in love with someone and have a long-term relationship. And I think the statistical data on that are pretty clear too. most single people don't have a lot of sex.
The phrase that I use in the book to describe this exact phenomenon, where you on the one hand have hypersexual public life, you can walk down any street and see women in lingerie on posters or watch TV, and there's very explicit sex scenes, etc. So on the one hand, we've had this amazing ramping up of sexuality in public life. But on the other hand, exactly as you say, we have what's sometimes called the sex recession, the fact that people are having sex later, less frequently. I think what's happening generally is people are having probably more casual sex, but they're having sex less frequently. So when they are having sex, it's more likely to be casual, but they're not forming these long-standing relationships. And the term that I use in the book is cultural death grip syndrome, taken from the quasi-medical term death grip syndrome, which is used by compulsive porn users to describe the physical experience of impotence when you use too much porn. You get to the point where you actually can't be aroused either physically or psychologically in real life because you use so much porn. And I think cultural death grip syndrome is the counterpart to that, where on the one hand, we have this astounding availability of sexual stimuli at the click of a button at any moment. Anything that you can imagine is available on the internet immediately. And that seems to be demotivating people to actually seek out meaningful sexual relationships, which in the long term are vastly better for us in every possible way. But we have a culture enabled by technology, which is very, very short term in every way. So people are channeled towards that kind of immediate relief that disincentivizes proper,
I think the rule is something like unearned surfeit turns into revulsion. Right. It's too much of a good thing means that it's no longer a good thing, and that and that goes along with an idea too that there's something like optimal deprivation, right? I mean, look, let's say you've just had a big banquet and someone sits you down and says, "Well, now you have to eat 5 pounds of dessert." It's like first of all, that's not going to be a very attractive proposition, and second of all, it might actually make you ill. Is that everything has to be in proper proportion, and now they're training themselves, maybe right from puberty, to be impotent cuckold voyeurs, essentially. So that's not good training. Then they're training themselves to view women as targets of short-term gratification. So that's like training in psychopathy. And then they're also interfering with their ability to establish a relationship and also to perform sexually in a real environment. So all that seems like, like a 5-dimensional catastrophe.
Now, what I really like about that clip is that it kind of lists in some ways all the ways in which porn can affect men and why it's so harmful to some people, to a lot of people, actually. The kind of, in many ways, the saddest thing about it is that I think a lot of people get into porn when they're, for example, teenagers. Let's say male sex drive is the strongest when they're teenagers. And then they spend their teenage years, maybe their 20s, maybe even their 30s, engaging with porn instead of focusing on trying to find relationships and build long-term healthy relationships for themselves. And the outcome is that they kind of waste a big chunk of their time. Their prime really is wasted on this type of empty, short-term pursuit that doesn't really give them anything from like a fulfillment perspective or a purpose or meaning, like no meaning to their lives as they would have if they channeled their energy instead into actually pursuing a woman and into trying to get into a long-term relationship that way and build a family that way. I kind of want to highlight, like for me, this idea, the life that is being peddled, the life that is being sold by Aella and other people like her who create porn for the masses. I think it's a very, very short-term kind of life where, for example, you might be happy to participate in that. You might be happy to engage with it when you're 20. You might be happy to do it when you're 30. But then let's say you're 40, 50 years old. And then the question is, what do you have left in your life? So it's very short-term. And this idea that you never really, like, you don't actually develop a connection with a real human being. You are just watching images. You're watching videos, you're watching images. You might even be, in some ways, we're going to come to OnlyFans in particular in a second, but you might be kind of giving yourself the illusion of a relationship without actually having one. And that means that there's no reciprocation. You can't really take anything from I mean, okay, you can take sexual pleasure, I guess. But you can't give anything and you can't really take anything back beyond the instant sexual gratification that you might get from that. We'll go to the next clip now.
That'll really
and then you
going.
end up in a situation where young men can feel as if they are winning at life, right, with their sex robot, who's giving them all the cues that suggest fitness. But in fact, you know, they don't need to wash, they don't need to have a job, they don't need to do anything productive with their lives because the sex robot doesn't care. OnlyFans, I think, is a step along this path, because what OnlyFans offers is not just pornography. It offers a parasocial relationship. It gives the impression to customers that this woman cares about them, remembers his birthday, remembers his children's names, all of this stuff. But it's all obviously a mirage, and it's one that's purchased. And it's completely the wrong incentive structure for everyone.
Right, well, and that's narcissistic exploitation on the part of the females with antisocial personality traits, and often, what would you say, aided and abetted by quasi-psychopathic pimps, electronic pimps. And, you know, those OnlyFans women, that you made a very good point there, those are actually androids, right? Because they're not women. Now, you might say, what the hell are you talking about, Dr. Peterson? Obviously, they're women. It's like, no, they're not. They're machine-women hybrids. And the machine is the technology that can broadcast their image to millions of people. So you're not a woman anymore if you're in a million men's bedrooms at the same time.
Okay, and just to really quickly comment about that, I think there is especially a danger the closer that porn or the experience of porn comes to giving people the impression that they're actually in a relationship, the more dangerous it is, because it's the harder it becomes for men to take themselves out of that and to realize that it's all fake, that it's all illusory. I know we focus quite a lot so far on the impact of men, the influence of this kind of thing on men, but also for the women who participate in OnlyFans. Now, Aella, I think, is a very successful person on OnlyFans. And as with most things, there's a very, very small proportion of women who are actually successful on OnlyFans. The vast majority of people using the platform do not profit from it to anywhere near the same extent. And so for them, for all the women who are doing that in the hopes that they will have this lucky break, that it will make them rich, they are also peddling in this short-term idea. They will only be young and beautiful and attractive for so long. And that is a period of time where they're at their prime, where they could be building families, where they could be creating a future for themselves, one that is ultimately really fulfilling and really rewarding and makes them happy. And I know I'm assuming here that people want to build families and so on, but I really truly believe that this is the case for the vast, vast majority of people. And instead of doing that, they are engaging in OnlyFans instead. And the impact, maybe she is the 1 in a million kind of people who would be happy and satisfied with a life that's just filled with fundamentally short-term sexual gratification with a million different partners. But for the vast majority of women, this is not the case. One of the things that I also want to get into as we continue here is the idea of interaction with women on OnlyFans. So I'm going to show you a little tweet. Okay, to read the tweet out, this is someone who says, I know a guy who runs an OnlyFans agency. He hires guys to send out messages pretending to be girls. If you've subscribed to OnlyFans, you're likely spending money to flirt with a man. And he adds a little bit more detail. He says he has real girls, but they have men do most of the texting, just use the girls when they need photos and videos. And what's really fascinating about this is that not only does OnlyFans kind of give you this illusion that you are engaging in a relationship, it's something that they can actually exploit and make a lot of money off of as well. So there are multiple layers of illusion that you live in a deluded fantasy when you're a man that really sends money to women on OnlyFans, and that's so utterly sad. I know for the vast majority of women, they would consider OnlyFans to be cheating because you're engaging with a particular individual, you're sending money to an individual woman, even if women are in the context of a marriage, even if some women might be okay with pornography per se, OnlyFans really takes that a step further because it gives you this image of a relationship, and that makes it so much worse for all of the people that are participating in it. It is, to me, so utterly heartbreaking that people create an OnlyFans account, mostly women, that women create an OnlyFans account and they sell their looks, they sell their bodies, they sell this experience that they sell a fake experience of a relationship to men, and ultimately neither they really benefit from it, nor do the men benefit all that much from it. Ultimately, there's just a lot of misery on both sides at the end of it. And maybe, for the small minority of women, they actually don't care. But definitely the unsuccessful, the ones who are unsuccessful on these types of platforms suffer in a way that is not really comparable and is not really fair. And I find it difficult to understand how the women who are super successful, especially, sophisticated, educated, clever ones, those women, when they are really successful, they don't kind of sit there and ruminate on that a little bit. What is actually happening to the men who are sending us all of this money? Are they married? to what extent, like, are they, if they're not married, are they very young and spending a lot of time on OnlyFans when they could be doing something else that's much more productive and much more helpful for them? Like, what are we taking from them that is wrong, that is unfair, that is immoral? And I think that that's the fundamental question that I would really ask here in terms of pornography and use of pornography and OnlyFans as an extension of that. We'll go to the next clip now.
What do you think of monogamous relationships? Like, philosophically, can you maybe steel man or make the case for monogamous relationships? Can you understand the pros and cons of monogamous relationships? I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you if you're like, hey, you can do whatever you want, but you and I are going to spend the rest, like, you're 80 years old and like, oh, we spent 60 years in a marriage together, we've never had sex with anybody else. I think that's like awesome. If that's what you want, that's great. I have like a little bit more problems with people doing that while also forcing their partner not to misbehave if they want to. Like, if you're like, we only made it this far in a monogamous relationship because I forced my partner not to pursue an intimacy that she wanted to. Then I feel like a little like more like, I don't know if that's great.
How do you know if it's a real want for an intimacy? Like checking out a attractive person while being inside a monogamous relationship. Yeah, how do you square that? Is that bad that the person cannot pursue those feelings?
I mean, it depends if they want to. I tracked in my relationship survey, I tracked the amount of cheating over time in a relationship. Like, how long have you been in this relationship, and how have you cheated?
Mm-hmm. What's the results of that?
Men cheat a lot. Women too, but men cheat about 30% more than women do. I also asked men and women to predict if they think their partner has cheated, and people's predictions were about the same. So people roughly predicted that their male or female like spouse hadn't cheated about the same rate, but men cheated much more than women.
So who was more correct in their prediction, though?
So men were more correct in their predicting women, and women were more off. Women thought men cheated much less than they actually did, but both of them were off. But like the male gap was significantly more. So yeah, I mean, you're right. When you say monogamy is not default, like I think you're like really getting at something. Like human beings are just, especially in long-term relationships, it's difficult to only want one person. But to be fair, I think monogamy and commitment are very different. I think you'd be incredibly. I've known so many very long-term, super committed poly couples that live lives that look very similar to the very romantic monogamous couples, like children, houses, like 20 years. Yeah, and that works great for them.
Now, that was a really interesting point to me. I still wanted to include it in this because it makes a point around what is the type of life that we should aspire to, what is the type of relationship that we should aspire to. And I do think that there is a value in monogamy that is very different from any kind of polyamorous couple or polyamorous group, I guess. And that is fundamentally this idea of raising children in a stable, secure environment. Ultimately, if you've watched any of my videos, but even if you haven't, you can go watch them. There are a lot of people who struggle with blended families. So whenever a family breaks down and there are kids impacted by that, and then they go on to have another spouse and then have kids with the next spouse, then suddenly the types of conflicts that you're trying to manage are so very, very, very different from the kinds of conflicts that come up in a single family with a stable, secure, long-term marriage, where both the mother and the father are there, and the kids have access to both biological parents. And so I think this fundamental argument around monogamy and polygamy is a really interesting one, because I think she's coming at it from this angle of freedom is the absolute good. And I say this as someone who's actually pretty libertarian in most of my views. I do think that freedom is fundamentally good. And if you agree with each other that you don't really want a monogamous relationship, then fine. But I think that there is an assumption there that agreeing with each other that you don't want a monogamous relationship is actually coming from a place of openness and a place of trust and an honest place where people are actually honest with themselves about what they want. And I honestly believe that for the majority of people right now who are trying out polyamory or who are trying out open relationships, they're doing it because they feel pressured into it by their other partner. They don't want their marriage to break down, or they don't want their relationship to break down. And they've kind of been sold what I believe is a lie, that you'll be able to save your marriage or save your relationship if you start seeing other people. And obviously you can tell just by hearing it said that way that that's pretty contradictory, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think fundamentally I would argue that when you are married, like even if people, even if especially men, struggle with being faithful, I would argue that comes from a lot of different places. But we can take that at face value and say, okay, maybe it's not what we're naturally inclined to do from the biological side of things. All that said, I think that you have an obligation to your spouse. I think you make vows that you should abide by. I think the vast majority of people when they experience cheating, they find it absolutely devastating. It crushes them on such a deep emotional level that they struggle to recover from it, and they struggle to form healthy relationships afterwards as well. And the idea that, hey, it doesn't really matter, like, why she makes a comparison that telling people that they cannot pursue a sexual relationship with another person is the same as trying to restrict the number of friends that they have or something. That, like, why should you be able to tell your partner what they should and shouldn't do? And that is such a strange argument to me. You make these commitments to each other equally so, and there are consequences to sex. There are risks to sex. This is why it's not a decision that you can make as an individual in your own relationship, because you can be like, yeah, no, it doesn't matter if I go have sex with 10 other people. Of course it matters if you go have sex with 10 other people. There are kids who, you might get pregnant if this is a decision that you go for. And then if you're already married and you already have kids, then the impact of that marriage, of that pregnancy is intense. Like, you have an impact on absolutely everyone in your family just by virtue of that. Even if you say, okay, but birth control, condoms, etc., the likelihood of getting pregnant is very low. It's like, yes, I understand all of that still happens and it's still risky. And especially if alcohol is involved, and then, people make dumb decisions all the time. The other thing from a risk perspective is, of course, STIs. So any type of disease that impacts not only you, but also impacts your husband, can impact future kids, and so on. Now, I say this from a woman's perspective, it's equally the same from the male perspective. It is absolutely devastating to people when people cheat. And this perception that, hey, monogamy is not really all that natural. There are lots. She makes the argument that there are a million different, or at least that she knows a lot of polyamorous couples who have lives that look very similar to monogamous couples. And I think that is to me, it's a very dangerous claim, because what I would be interested in knowing, okay, if they have kids, then how exactly are they raising their kids? What is the environment that those kids are growing up in? What level of exposure do those kids have to other random adults that they might not interact with all that much? Do they have like 5 parents because they interact with all of them equally as much? I want ultimately that people have an idea of what type of environment do we want to bring kids up in, and that they actually consciously decide to go for it. Like, if you're going to decide to have kids, then you should choose the optimally best environment that you can possibly create for kids. And I find it hard to imagine that a lot of polygamous couples can do that in a meaningful way. We'll switch now to the next Jordan Peterson clip.
And check women out. So maybe one of the things a man wants to do if he's going to commit to a long-term relationship is he wants to find out, well, does this woman have what it takes to actually commit to a long-term relationship? And what that means in part is that he has to know that she's capable of controlling her impulsive desires, right? Because otherwise she's going to stray. And that's actually a worse problem for men than it is for women. You can tell a woman has control over her impulses if she can say no, right? I mean, it's a way of testing. So imagine that you're a young guy with plenty to offer, and you're a hot young woman, and you meet, and you're pretty attracted to each other. Now, both of you are going to fall under the sway of short-term temptation, obviously. Now, the question is, are both of you or either of you capable of being mature in your regard for your iterated future self and the potential of a long-term relationship? And the way the man checks that out is by seeing if the girl will say no. And maybe he checks that even harder because he does everything he can to seduce her, and she still says no. And it works, and he knows she's interested, and she still says no. Well, then he can conclude that she's capable of keeping her pants on, let's say. And that's actually something that you need to conclude if you're going to commit to a long-term partnership, obviously, on the male front, because you want to be assured of paternity. And so, these are very intense games that men and women play with each other, and they're no holds barred games because everything's at stake.
And so he makes a fundamental argument there in terms of why do men care about things like body count, for example, for a woman. And it comes down to this idea of paternity and to what level, like how much trust can you have in this woman and in the fact that any kids that she has are actually your kids biologically. And that's obviously an extremely devastating thing for a man to find out, right? If he's been in a long-term marriage and then at some point he finds out that his children are not actually biologically his, and you can imagine why that's so incredibly heartbreaking. Fundamentally, what I feel like the Lex Fridman interview kind of really misses out on, or just doesn't register at all, is that actually for the vast majority of men, a high body count in a woman is extremely undesirable. Like it's not something that makes you a high value woman in the dating marketplace. Men don't like it. Men don't want to go for it. And it's kind of the same with the idea of OnlyFans as well. I don't know. Like I would have a very hard time imagining that there are a ton of men out there who would be very happy with their wives participating on, or even girlfriends participating on OnlyFans. And I think both of those just come from the same place, which is that sex does result in children, and sex does or can result in the spread of infections and disease. If anyone remembers monkeypox, it's not that long ago. And these are the types of behaviors that people who want to just have a family and who want to have kids and who want a stable life and who really want to engage on that level instead of who want to get more meaning out of their lives rather than this idea that sex can just be a hobby and just something that you do for fun and it's all lighthearted and it has no consequences. And if people feel like it, then why not? It doesn't really matter. I think it matters to a lot of people. And yes, there might be a proportion of our population who are capable of engaging with sex in the way that Aella does and not feel any negative consequences from that or not experience any negative consequences from that. But that's just not the case for the vast, vast, vast majority of people, both men and women. I think fundamentally, for me, the reason that I wanted to make this video comes down to this idea of responsibility. And so obviously, to a large extent, I think there's a very strong argument to be made that women can make whatever decisions they want to make, men can make whatever decisions they want to make. And if the outcomes of things like porn are negative for men and they're negative for women who participate in porn freely, like who are not being coerced into it, if the consequence for both of them are negative, then that's kind of too bad. Grown adult people can make their own decisions and they have to learn from their mistakes and they have to experience these things. Maybe they even enjoy it. Maybe they only come to regret it when they're 40 years old and their life looks very, very different to how they imagined it to be. And I think that that's fair enough as an argument. There's always this idea that, to use a different example, to what extent is it Instagram's fault that they developed their app to be the most addictive that it can be? To what extent is it TikTok's fault that they developed their app to be the most addictive that it can be? And how much responsibility do they really carry? Because obviously the individuals who are participating, who are using these, who are consuming content there, they are the ones that are ultimately responsible for changing their habits and changing themselves. And I think that is true. And so I kind of want to put this out into the world for anyone who is in that in-between stage. I feel very much that, I have a lot of admiration for both Lex Fridman and for Jordan Peterson. But I think that there is this risk when you have a platform the size of Lex Fridman's that you are in many ways promoting. I guess that would be the thing that made me uncomfortable. It felt like a little bit of a promotion of sex work, of OnlyFans, of Aella as an individual, because it presents, obviously she's someone who chose what she's doing and who's happy with her choices, and that's amazing and that's great. But there are all of these knock-on consequences on everyone else that I think are important, and I think that people should be aware of, that at least people should have some kind of idea that there's an argument against these things. And if you are consuming porn and you feel like there's something wrong there, then you're probably right, and you should listen to that feeling. Thank you for listening today. If you want to check out my regular show, you can check out my channel. Feel free to leave any comments or like the video if you liked it, and subscribe for future content. Thanks.